Hey friends, my name is Richie and welcome back to my channel. So I'm gonna be recording all day today. It's only like 3:30 and I'm gonna record for like as long as I possibly can. Probably gonna take breaks in between, eat a little bit of food, and then I'll be right back to the videos. But Um, I just want to record for a really, really, really long time today. And I did have some other videos planned, but then I decided, you know what, I don't care about that. I'm just gonna, I fixed it in my notebook by, like, tearing pages out and then rewriting whatever, and then I did, it doesn't matter. Anyway, the point is, we're gonna finish the chapter that I started last time, and I'm only putting one chapter in this video. Well, technically, like 80% of a chapter. Just you guys know what I'm trying to say. I'm technically only putting about like one chapter in this video, just because it's the second half of a chapter that we've already read, and and then the next video will have two chapters. So I'm gonna record as many chapters as I possibly can, and then I'm gonna be posting them whenever I can. Like I'm probably gonna post. I would like to at least post the rest of the chapter that I've already read tonight, but I'm gonna have to see how late it is. Otherwise, I'm just gonna like leave stuff to upload tomorrow while I'm doing whatever I'm doing, like while I'm with my support worker or whatever. Like it's hard. It's just hard because I can't like just leave videos to upload while I'm recording videos, because if I leave the page for too long, it might just freeze up and I'm kind of nervous. Like, I don't know, sometimes if the page reloads, then it's gonna just freeze. I don't know. I'm not making any sense. Anyway, my mom's away and I am pissed off. Like, I'm not pissed off, I'm just frustrated and stressed and stuff. And okay. I just want to read, so let's. I swear, it never fails. And I will be doing another video for the I'm the Parent of a Stuffed Animal series, probably in a few days. But until then, anyway, I'm just until then. Mm, go away. Ugh, there's so much freaking yawning. Anyway, I want to read the chapter. By the way, I don't pre-read stuff, like, unless I've read it like before I was uploading fiction readings. Like there was some books that I read before I was even uploading fiction readings, like Trying to Impress Matt and the dark, creepy, whatever the creepy one is that I'm reading, the Wattpad one. I don't know what the fuck. I forget what it's called. But anyway, I'm gonna go to yeah. Oh, I don't know how to. Okay, I'm gonna read the rest of the chapter. So, like I was saying, there are some books that I pre-read before I was doing fiction readings, or before I thought of them, or before I thought of, or before I thought of posting them on my channel. But Other than that, unless it's one of those two things, I don't forget. Unless it's one of those two things, I don't. Sorry, I'm having trouble focusing. But, um, what was I saying? Yeah, unless, other than that, I don't pre-read stuff. So, like, a Guardian Angel, for example, I found this one specifically to read on my channel. So I haven't been pre-reading anything. So, when I read, you guys are hearing what I'm hearing for the first time. You guys are actually hearing me read it for the first time. Okay, let's. Okay, now let's read. Holy jeez. It was official. They had sold more than 50,000 copies of their CD, and it was continuing to fly off the shelves. It was a call for a celebration, because at the rate they were going, Hunts and Aberdeen would be signing them to Nightosphere tonight. It had taken close to 2 years for them to accomplish it, but it was a feat that managed to take care of itself. Marshall had decided long ago that Billy would manage them, and so far he'd done a spectacular job of it, getting them gigs and plenty of good publicity, and hooked up with a moderately known record label, Apocalyptica. In celebration of everything out of his own pocket, the man rented a club where the band, their friends, and their fans could celebrate the accomplishment, and every cent made was going to go to making the next CD. Marshall was excited. His 21st birthday having passed last month, could now drink legally as much as he wanted during this celebration. That, however, would be a limited thing. He'd invited Fiona to come along, and with her 19th birthday also having passed, she would be allowed to enter the club but not drink. And in the few short years he'd known her, the blonde had only become more beautiful, and there was no doubt in his mind that someone would try and give her a drink or two, like he'd let that happen ever. Changing into clean clothes, Marshall examined the scar from the burn on his arm. It was finally starting to fade away, though it still hurt. He'd been cancer-free for 7 months when it came back, though he wondered this time how long it would last, because unlike the first time, he was to be put on chemo for the better part of a year, instead of just a few months, and with tougher drugs, too. Rolling his sleeves up just enough to keep the scar covered, Marshall continued dancing and continued dressing and grabbed his car keys and headed to Fiona's house. The party wasn't for another 3 hours, but by the time he'd get to the blonde's house and finally to the club, the party would be going at a decent pace. Fiona was blow drying her hair and decided to leave it down tonight. Marshall told her it was okay to dress herself up a bit for the occasion. So going out, she bought a dress with the money from her check from work at the Force Center. Dressing herself, Fiona checked herself out in the mirror as Kate patted her way over with a purring meow, being chased by her niece Jackie, who turned 20 months old only 3 days ago. Her other niece, Charlie, who was just over 8 months old, was downstairs with her mother. Late Jake and Lady had decided to take a vacation, and her parents were more than excited to take the girls. What do you say, Cake? Maybe a bit of makeup tonight? The cat meowed again, and taking that as a sign of agreement, Fiona grabbed eyeliner, mascara, and a peach-colored lip gloss from her drawer and carefully did her makeup, keeping an eye on the toddler in her room through the mirror. More than anything, she preferred to look natural, but tonight she felt that if she was to dress up, then a bit of makeup would be okay. Her dress was a backless blue halter top dress that clung to her chest and waist and flowed loosely around her legs, stopping just above her knees. Searching Searching around her closet, Fiona dug out her matching blue flats she'd bought just for the dress, and a pair of nylons. As she examined herself in the mirror, a knock came at her door as her mother opened it wider, poking in her head. Is Jake Jr. in here? Yeah, Ma, the blonde said, picking up the little girl who'd just been about to eat one of Fiona's hairbands. No, 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 you don't eat that, Missy. No, 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 no. Seeing this, Ellen smiled, taking the toddler from Fiona and setting her back on the floor. That's right, Junior, no eating hairbands, she said, now looking to her daughter. Fiona, sweetie, Marshall's here. Okay, thanks, Mom, Fiona said, watching as Jackie picked up Cake like a baby doll and hugged her to the cat's delight. Fiona, before you leave, I know that Marshall's old enough to drink now, and so are most of his friends, but please don't be pressured to drink too. I'd rather you not drink at all, she said, jostling the fussy infant in her arms. Don't worry, Mom, I don't plan on drinking at all anyways. It's not really my thing. I've seen people do a lot of stupid things when they're drunk, so I'd rather not. Good, I feel better knowing that you won't drink. Please be careful and have fun, and if you need us, give us a call, and if you need us to, we'll come get you, okay? Okay, Mom, thank you, Fiona said, hugging the older blonde tightly, giving both her mom and niece a kiss, and grabbed her small green purse with her cell phone money and ID in it. I'll see you later, and don't forget that your curfew is 1 a.m. on Saturdays, okay? And if you're running late, please call us rather than speeding. With a nod, Fiona walked from her room, heading downstairs and getting in the car where Marshall was waiting. Wait, why does she have a curfew? She's 19. And whatever. Hey, Marsh. Hi. Hey, Fee, you look amazing. You ready to rage? He asked with a grin at the blonde who smiled at him. Definitely, Fiona said as the car whipped into reverse and headed towards their destination. The club was loud, and the music was louder. And this particular hunt he'd been focusing on for more than a year now. He'd been here for less than an hour, spotting several members of the band, keeping his eyes peeled for the beautiful Fiona. And after he sat back on a bench against the wall, he spotted her arriving with the band's lead singer. They were met by their manager and motioned over, and much to his delight, she declined with a smile, and after a few moments she walked off, finding the other members of the band and talking to each of them before heading to get a drink. He couldn't wait because now his prey was alone at the bar, exactly where he'd expected her to be, and he could put his plan into action. Being the expert he had grown to become, the moment she looked away from her drink, searching for the black-haired singer, he dumped the liquid drug into her drink, without attracting a single lick of attention. With that done, he walked from the bar with his own drink to keep an eye on her from a distance. Time passed, she drank her drink, and eventually the tall black-haired singer came over to her excitedly, and after some words they hugged. Immediately after that, Fiona gripped the bar. The drugs were starting to take effect, no doubt, and it didn't seem as if the young man noticed anything wrong. They talked more and hugged once again, and the blonde stood from her seat, and for a moment he feared she would go with him, but instead, to his relief, the two were heading in opposite directions. Standing, he followed her. The place was large, loud, and crazy as people danced, drank, and partied with reckless abandon, celebrating an accomplishment that wasn't even theirs. Marshall arrived with Fiona around 9, and quickly they were allowed admittance into the building. Almost immediately, Billy spotted them and grabbed Marshall, pulling him towards a group of men who looked far too excited to meet him. Marshall motioned for her to follow, but Fiona shook her head and laughed. This always happened. After all the introductions, he would finally be free. Fiona, deciding to kill some time, floated from each part of the building, finding a different band member and catching up. And finally, after finishing up with Ash, Fiona made her way to the bar. What can I get for you? The bartender asked, eyeing the blonde suspiciously as she sat on the bar stool. She looked too young to be buying alcohol. Can I have a root beer, please? The man blinked, surprised, and then nodded. Sure thing, coming up, he said, filling the glass with ice and flooding it with soda from the fountain tap, handing it to the girl. How much? Fiona asked, digging through her purse for her wallet. It's on the house, he said with a smile as Fiona dropped some money into the tip jar. As the night wore on, the blonde had sat at the bar waiting for Marshall to finish up talking to the new men over in the corner. One of them looked familiar, and realizing it was Hudson Aberdeen, Fiona grinned, knowing what they must be discussing. They seemed to be having some kind of serious discussion, for he was listening to him intently, and only on rare occasions did he glance over to the blonde, sending her a smile. Fiona found herself staring over to the corner, wondering just what was going on. She reached over every now and then to take an occasional sip of her soda, paying no mind to it, and finally Marshall was released from the group, and he made his way over to her after shaking hands with not only with Hudson Aberdeen, but with the man next to him who looked very excited. What's that, Marsh? Fiona, those guys with Aberdeen were the ones who had a contract with my father originally. They're from Nightosphere Records. Because our contract is closing, they want to sign us. We did it, he said excitedly, hugging her. You're kidding, that's awesome, Marshall, Fiona said, hugging him back tightly and feeling as her balance shifted suddenly as she blinked quickly, her hand on the bar to steady herself. What was that? What was that? So you going to find what? Hang on. What was that? So you going to find the rest of the band and let them know? She asked curiously, keeping her hand flat on the bar for stability. Yup, then I'll be right back here with you for the rest of the night, okay? He asked happily, his eyes glinting in excitement. Sure thing, Marsh. I do have to use the bathroom, though, she said, standing and holding onto the bar to steady herself just a bit. Marshall hugged her and then was off to find the restroom. Sorry. Marshall hugged her and was then off to find the rest of his band to let them know the good news. Walking from the bar after finishing the last of her soda, Fiona was glad to see that she had retained her balance for the most part. She was just starting to get dizzy, though. Maybe it was just a head rush, though, or the heat of the club. After finishing her business, Fiona sat in one of the chairs in the bathroom with her head in her hands as she took slow, deep breaths. Feeling much better, the blonde stood and walked from the room, out into the darkened hall connecting the dance floor to the restrooms. Dizziness washed over her again, and taking slow breaths, Fiona leaned against the wall. She hoped Marshall wouldn't see her like this. It would only worry him. Maybe she just needed some air. Hey, you're Fiona, aren't you? You're the girl who sings the duets with Marshall, right? A voice said over the loud music, as heavy blue eyes looked over to the speaking figure. She recognized him from the bar. He was older than her with brown hair. He had to be at least a few years older than Marshall, mid-20s maybe. Why was she thinking about this, though? He had been gone when she'd left the bar. Smiling, she nodded at the man. Just because she was feeling weird didn't mean she was going to be rude to one of Marshall's fans. Yeah, that's me. It seemed to take forever to blink. Forever for her vision to clear, though it finally did. You're an amazing singer, he said, leaning close, too close for her to be comfortable. And you're crazy beautiful, too. She didn't understand what was going on. Her head was feeling so fuzzy so quickly, and it was taking everything Fiona had just to focus on standing, as she felt her knees continue to buckle, though leaning on the wall was certainly helping. Being pinned between the man and the wall was not. It had taken a moment for it to process before Fiona realized, with great shock, that he was touching her. Nobody but Marshall could ever touch her, and this guy had the nerve to do so. One hand was firmly on her waist, pulling her towards him, and the other on her face, angling it towards his. Immediately the blonde recoiled, aiming to push him away, only for her limbs to feel ridiculously heavy as she pushed him back only slightly. It was as far as she could manage, but once again she was sandwiched between the man and the wall, only this time her hands were on both sides of her, blocking the blonde in. Slowly his face neared hers, and just before their lips met, Fiona turned her head away, breathing shallow, panicked breaths, and feeling as his lips made their way from her jaw where the kiss had landed, tortuously descending her throat. Let's go to my place. Oh, oh, Glob, she was scared. Scared didn't even cut it. She was terrified. What the heck was wrong with her? Why was her body feeling like this? The worst part was that she was fighting with every fiber of her being to stay conscious, but because she knew by some overwhelmingly strong instinct that if she allowed the darkness to overtake her, something terrible would happen. Not a chance, the blonde spat. Again she made to push him away, but the moment her palms connected with his chest, her wrists were grabbed and pinned against the wall, his hips keeping her firmly in place. You're cute, but it wasn't a request. Fiona's heart was racing wildly as her vision began quickly clouding into black. Her mind was screaming at her. Stay awake! Stay awake! No, stay awake! Marshall, please. For some odd reason, her mind was drifting back to that time she got into a fight a few months ago, as Marshall's voice flooded her memory. Seriously, Fee, just knee him in the junk next time. You don't have to go completely bananas. Get him in the junk, punch him in the gut, or get him in the throat, and come tell me, or at least one of us. Marshall said simply, watching as the bouncer literally threw the man from the building, after he'd copped a feel of the blonde while she'd been bent over lining up a shot, playing a game of pool. The only reason the guys noticed something had happened was because she whirled around, punching him hard in the jaw, and started repeatedly kicking him once he'd hit the ground. As if that wasn't enough, she grabbed the cue ball and threw it hard at him after being pulled back by an extremely confused Marshall. I don't want you getting into trouble. Just do enough to get whoever it is away from you and find one of us. If you have to fight, fight. But I'd rather it be me than you. Oh, that was a flashback. Trying as hard as she could, Fiona brought her knee up, sharply hitting him in the stomach, and hooking her foot around his ankle, she jerked it as he dropped her, stumbling in pain. She slammed onto the ground hard, not realizing he'd been holding her upright. Everything was getting so difficult to move. Her legs felt like they weighed tons, and even more so, her arms, which had given out from underneath her as she now lay on the ground, the darkness engulfing her in waves. Alright. She had gone to the bathroom, it seemed, and after waiting such a long time, the short wait for her to exit the room seemed unbearable. But finally she did, entering into the dark hallway and leaning against the wall. Quickly he made his move. Hey, you're Fiona, aren't you? He asked smoothly, watching as her eyes met his. They were glossy, and her pupils were so dilated that one could barely notice the ring of blue around them. You're the girl who sings the duets with Marshall, right? He asked over the loud music. Very slowly, she smiled with a nod. It seemed to take every bit of effort just to do so. Yeah, that's me. Slowly she blinked and began struggling to focus. Now he leaned close. You're an amazing singer, and you're crazy beautiful, too, he said, now gripping her waist and angling her face to his. Though much to his shock, she'd pushed him away, with much more force than he'd anticipated. Using his arms, he blocked the blonde in, and leaning towards her, missing her lips as she turned away, though this time, instead of stopping, he continued down her milky pale throat. He could feel her pulse racing under his lips, and he smiled. Let's go to my place, he whispered, watching as her eyes widened. She was fighting it, and that much was obvious. She was feisty, and he loved it. Not a chance. He felt the weakening pressure of her palms on his chest, and grabbing her wrists, he slammed them against the wall, using his body weight to keep her in place. You're so cute, but that wasn't a request, he breathed, watching as she struggled. She actually kneed him in the stomach and hooked her ankle around his, nearly tripping him as he dropped her. The blonde stumbled, dropping to the floor, finally succumbing to the drug in her system as she collapsed. Oh, tonight was such a success. He couldn't wait to get this beauty home. But then a sudden realization struck him. How was he going to get her out of here? A large majority of the club would recognize her, and at any moment he could be spotted by one of the band members carrying her out. He was angry. He thought he had his bases covered. Had forgotten that the blonde before him wasn't just a stranger to the populace in the club. This would not do. He'd waited long enough. He deserved this prize after such painstaking research. Looking around, he spotted the door to the men's room, deciding that as long as she stayed quiet enough, it would be the perfect place for him to do what he wished to her. Reaching over, he pulled open the door, bringing the blonde with him, as he dragged her into the handicap stall, leaning Fiona against the wall. He pulled out the heavy-duty zip ties in his pockets, binding her wrists to the support rails, before pulling out another vial from his pocket. He wanted a fight from her especially, but now that things had changed, he knew he couldn't afford one. Popping the top of the small vial, he tilted her head back, pouring the contents down her throat, watching as she began coughing, and quickly pocketed it. Lifting the blonde to her feet once again, he used his weight to keep her upright as he sandwiched her between the wall, feeling as her head lolled back on his shoulder, once again revealing that milky smooth neck of hers. He kissed her, reveling in her cinnamon vanilla scent, as he let his tongue run down her neck, his teeth grazing against the sweet, delicate skin. She tasted exactly as he'd expected her to. She was so sweet, so soft, so perfect. He was pissed. With this one he wanted to take his time and have her in every way imaginable, but that wasn't happening tonight. He was reduced to one quick screw in a bathroom stall. Her dress, though, was more of a help than a hindrance, and biting the tie at her neck that kept it up, he pulled the ribbon from its knot, watching as the top of her beautiful form-fitting blue dress came loose, sliding down, revealing a bra that matched her cream-colored skin. This further excited him. She had an angel's voice and an angel's body, and unable to put it off any longer, he hiked up the bottom of her dress, leaning the blonde once again. once again against the wall as he tore through the nylon of her pantyhose. There would be there would be no more waiting. He wanted her now. Marshall had finished telling the band the good news, but paused when he noticed the lack of Fiona where he'd left her. Remembering her need for the restroom, the dark-haired rocker made his way to the back of the club, and immediately headed towards the ladies' room. Cracking it open, he called out for the blonde, receiving no answer. Walking up back to the club, he looked out for anyone recognizable, finally spotting FP. Maybe he'd seen Fiona. It was his job tonight to keep an eye on her. Hey, have you seen Fee walking around anywhere? Dude, she went to the bathroom. I watched her go in, but she hasn't come out yet. Now Marshall felt an uneasiness settling into his stomach. After the blonde had gotten into a fight a few months ago, the boys decided that every time they went out, the designated driver would be the one to keep an eye on Fiona, and tonight was Ignitus's turn. Help me look for her, he said, continuing to walk around as Ignitus beeline to the bathrooms, walking into the ladies' room like he owned it and belonged in there. I would have seen her come out, he said, giving Marshall a serious look, as the two shared a glance, before turning their gazes towards the men's room, feeling the same sense of dread. She was cold, so cold that her body had started shivering. Slowly Fiona opened her eyes, looking around, spotting the tile of the walls moving in and out of focus, hearing harsh breaths in her ear, and feeling as her nylons were being torn and ripped from her body. Fiona was going to kill him. She was going to kill him and rip his head right off his perverted freaking neck. That was the plan until she tried pulling at her wrists, only to feel them barely budge. Looking down, Fiona blinked hazily down and found them to be firmly tied in place with the zip ties. Feeling as his fingers hooked into the side of her panties, tugging them down, the blonde panicked, unable to move. Fiona screamed at the top of her lungs, and immediately he'd covered her mouth, silencing her as best he could, as she struggled against him, against the ties binding her wrists in place. Fiona was still so tired, and the struggling was taking so much out of her, but she refused to stop. She would never stop fighting. She would stop when she was dead, because there was no way she would let him continue to have his hands on her. She was getting fuzzy-headed again as her legs began to shake, and her vision began growing hazier. Dropping to the ground, unable to keep standing, Fiona continued to pull at the zip ties that held her in place with all she could. Crying out in pain against his hand, the ties cut deep into her skin and began to bleed, and shaking her head to get his hand off her mouth, Fiona continued screaming. Quickly her world grew fuzzy as she was met with darkness once more. The sound of a door slamming open was the last thing she heard. Thank goodness. She was shivering, and it seemed that the instant he'd noticed her small jerky movements was the moment she'd begun screaming, the tired walls of the bathroom only amplifying the sound. Quickly he'd covered her mouth as she desperately struggled to get away from him, pulling uselessly on the ties that held her to the rails. Even so, she continued to struggle as they dug sharply into her skin, cutting it. The plan was shot to hell. Moments after, she began to grow weary once again. Sinking to the ground, desperately trying to escape his touch, he continued to grip her tightly, still smothering her screams. The bathroom doors burst open just as she'd passed out. Fiona! Girlie! Those were her bandmates. Now the situation was critical. Releasing her, he crawled towards the next stall, listening as the two younger men wrenched at the stall door, and the moment he'd made it out of the stall, the squealing sound of bending metal was heard as the stall door hit the floor. They'd ripped it right off the hinges. He listened. There was a sound of the zip tie snapping. One of them had to have a knife. Had to have had a knife. If only he could just sneak away. Suddenly his eyes were met with Marshall's, and in an instant he was out the door, being swiftly followed by the red-haired bassist, notorious for his very short temper. He ran through crowds trying to loose him, but the redhead was shouting at everyone to move, until suddenly he was grabbed by his neck and slammed to the ground by a tall, white-haired, bearded man. What? Only seconds later, he was pounced on by the redhead, who began beating him unmercifully. The rest of the band hurried over, but when people began pulling at the redhead, much to his shock, he pulled out his switchblade and held it to the throat of the man beneath him, immediately making the crowd back up and grow silent. Ignitus, take it easy, man, the drummer Ash said, slowly approaching. Yeah, dude, give me the knife. The other band member, Moko, they called him, the backup bassist, slash guitarist said, inching closer. Don't do this, kid. Give me the knife. The redhead looked around before closing the blade and putting it into his pocket. What were you going to do to her? He growled, staring at the man. Then suddenly his anger cleared enough for him to think logically. Billy, call 911. Fiona needs an ambulance. Immediately, the boys in the band all exchanged worried looks, and not once did the redhead's eyes leave his. It was like staring into the gates of hell. Quickly, he began patting down the man's pockets, pulling out 3 small vials and zip ties from his pockets. The ties had earned the man a punch to the face, splitting his lip. "What the hell is this?" he growled, holding up the vials. 2 of the 3 were empty. "Drugs," the man gasped, and this earned him another punch. "No shit, Sherlock. What drugs? What did you give her?" This guy was going to kill him. "GHB." He watched as the redhead closed his eyes, growling under his breath before turning to the older man. "What the hell is that?" he asked in a dangerous voice. "It's similar to roofies, but worse." This earned him another set of blows. "Go call the police. I'm bringing him to Marshall." Standing, the redhead hauled the man up, bending his arm awkwardly behind his back, and almost immediately he struggled to get away, though he was quickly thrown to the ground by the redhead once more, and this time his head was slammed hard into the concrete floor, making him see spots. "Try and run again. Give me one good reason to kill you here and now. I swear I'll do it," he growled, standing and hauling the man up, though this time he was restrained by the rest of the band and Billy, who pulled out his cell phone and called the police and an ambulance. It was much like a death march, and the men knew exactly where they were headed. They paraded into the restroom, much to Marshall's obvious confusion, but when the redhead and Marshall exchanged words, the man was met with a look that really made him wish that he'd tried running again, so the redhead would have killed him. They hadn't taken 3 steps when the sound of a panicked scream was heard from the men's room. "Fiona! Girlie!" Marshall and Ignitus stormed into the room, spotting the only stall with a shut door, and racing over, they each grabbed part of the stall door, pulling it hard and wrenching it from its hinges after several tugs. Marshall's heart was pounding in his chest as he dropped to the ground, pulling Fiona up into his arms. FP was quick to cut her free from the rail, and more than careful as he cut the embedded plastic from her wrists. Her wrists had been bound to the rail by zip ties and were bleeding from her struggles. The top of her dress had been pulled down and the bottom pushed up, so it bunched around her waist, like some kind of absurd tutu. Marshall was checking the blonde thoroughly now, looking for any sign of what he feared most. Her bra was still in place, and her neck was covered in red bite marks and blotches. Her nylons were practically torn to shreds, and her panties were partially pulled down with one side lower than the other. It seemed to Marshall's utter relief that she'd woken up and put up a struggle before the man could follow through with his intentions. It felt like an eternity had passed as he held her in his arms. It had only been bare moments since they pulled down the door. Suddenly, Marshall spotted movement as a man rushed from the room. FP was quick to follow. Hurriedly, Marshall began covering Fiona with her dress and tying it back in place as he choked back angry tears. He would kill whoever did this. It seemed she was coming around, and Marshall watched as Fiona's breathing became panicked, and she struggled against him, screaming once again. The last thing she remembered was the man pulling at her panties, and feeling arms wrapped tightly around her, the blonde began struggling, screaming in a panic. It felt as if the man was sitting on her chest as she began to hyperventilate, pushing at the arms that held her. Fiona's vision was so blurry, and she felt sick to her stomach. Suddenly everything went black again, as the darkness returned as quickly as it had gone. "Fiona! Fiona, it's okay, you're safe," Marshall said, trying to calm the struggling girl in his arms. "You're safe now, I got you, you're okay," he said, watching in a panic as she passed out once again, her body suddenly going completely limp in his arms. He cradled her in his arms and watched in shock as FP, Ash, Moko, and Billy entered the bathroom, each having some sort of grip on the man in the center, who was already sporting 2 black eyes and a fat lip. Ignitus released him, walking over to Marshall and crouching in front of him. "You have less than 5 minutes to beat his ass. The cops and an ambulance are both on the way. I found zip ties and GHB in his pocket," he said, watching as Marshall's eyes radiated complete and utter fury. "Hold her." Ignitus took the blonde in his arms and sat with his back against the stall wall. He knew Marshall didn't want her to see what was happening out there if she woke up. Ignitus didn't want her to see it either. Fiona was shaking, and the redhead could feel the sweat begin to accumulate on her body. Slowly her eyes opened, her pupils huge, and gagging she began throwing up, coughing and gasping for air. "You're okay, girlie, you're gonna be okay," FP said softly, quickly turning her to face the floor, rubbing her back, and holding her up off the ground as he kept her long hair out of her face. Fiona felt horrible, completely horrible, but the fact that her hands were on the ground meant something. She just couldn't remember what. She couldn't remember what happened, or why FP was holding her as she threw up, or even why her head was pounding so violently. She just knew that having her hands flat on the ground was a very, very good thing. Ignatius's hand rested innocently on her waist, and the feel of it sickened her to no end, yet she didn't know why. Fiona's arm still felt like lead, and raising her arm, she weakly pushed his hand off her. She was tired, so terribly tired. It felt as if the darkness was swallowing her whole, and Fiona had a terrible feeling that it wasn't the first time she was blacking out. Once again, she was met with a darkness that only increased her fear. More than anything right now, she wanted to run. The blonde was passed to the redhead, and immediately the man felt pain unlike never before as the men let him go, and Marshall began pummeling him. He swore he felt his ribs break. Not one of them stopped the onslaught or had even tried to help Marshall. The group let him have his pound of flesh and then some. There were rumors that he had cancer and could be dying. If that was the case, how could a dying guy hit so hard? The only thing that caught his attention was the sound of the girl throwing up. What felt like an eternity later, but it had only been moments, the sound of the redhead from before calling after her as she'd scrambled from the stall in panic, falling as she ran, and turning, Marshall caught Fiona, holding her tightly in his arms before she could hit the ground. "Fiona, are you okay?" he asked nervously as the blonde visibly trembled, clinging tightly to him, barely able to stand. "No, I can't," she breathed before collapsing in his arms. Quickly he lay her down, and seconds later the police hurried in, followed by the paramedics. The man was taken into custody, and Fiona was brought to the hospital. Thank God. Fiona opened her eyes slowly. Even now they felt so heavy. She could hear people talking angrily, and when she looked around she found that she was secluded from the others with a curtain, and this made her blink in confusion. Where was she? "Mrs. Wright, I told you I'm sorry," Marshall said in all sincerity. After the ambulance ride to the hospital he called her parents, and her mother had been livid. "Sorry? You're sorry? Marshall, sorry doesn't cut it. Do you know what could have happened to her because you left her alone?" Ellen said angrily, Jackie chipping in her 2 cents too, not having an idea of what was going on. "Sorry don't cut it, no work, Marshall." Fiona could just imagine the little girl, with all her sass, having her hands on her hips. "Jackie, this is grown-up talk now. Shush," Steve said. "I'm well aware," Marshall said softly. "He'd never meant for this to happen. Hell, had he known it would, he never would have invited her along, member of the band or not." Steve, however, stuck up for Marshall. "Ellen, calm down. It's not like Marshall planned this. I'm sure that the next time will be different." "Oh, yes, the next time will be so different, Steve. The next time we let her go to a place like that with him, not only will she get drugged and filled up, she'll be raped, too." "Ellen, that's enough," Steve said with a glare at his wife, while Marshall gasped in shock as anger coursed through him. "Don't you ever say that!" he shouted angrily. "Dude, hey!" "Not cool, Mrs. Wright, not cool at all." Marshall turned, giving the boys a warning glance, and immediately they quieted. "She's my daughter, and I think it best if you just stay away from her for a while." Marshall felt as if he'd been snapped. As if he'd been slapped. "You're a sweet boy, Marshall, but the company you keep and the life you're living now is no good for Fiona. Oh, I'm too much of a bad boy for your daughter, is that right? You're scared that I'll let her get hurt? If that's your only reason for me to stay away from Fiona, it's a poor one. No matter where people go, there's danger, and with me she's safer than with anyone else, because nobody else would put themselves in harm's way to keep her safe like I would. Nobody else would fight for her the way I would to keep her safe. I love her, and I'll be damned before I let her go, because you think I'm not good enough for her. No, I don't think you'll let her get hurt. I think you'll hurt her." "What? I would never." "You already did. You left her alone and vulnerable in that place, and because you did, you allowed this to happen to her," the older blonde said, glaring at Marshall. Immediately the rest of the band stood up again. That's bullshit. Ridiculous. That's not his fault." "Stop it." Marshall, the band, and both her parents turned towards the sound. "Oh, stop it." Marshall, the band, and both her parents and niece turned towards the sound of the voice behind the curtains, and moving the curtains aside, they found Fiona struggling to push herself up, and watched as she fell against the bed once more. Squeezing her eyes tightly shut, she tried again to sit upright, this time looking at Marshall pitifully and reaching out for him. Immediately he came to her aid with an arm around her shoulder and the other being held by Fiona as she struggled, finally making it into a sitting position, smiling gratefully to Marshall as he propped pillows behind her back and adjusting in the bed to keep her upright. She couldn't take listening to these arguments any longer. Her head was killing her, and Fiona just wanted silence. All of you stop it. Mom, you can't blame Marshall for leaving me alone. Every time he invites me along to talk with the people he talks to, and every time I decline and go sit somewhere, or walk around finding the rest of the guys until he finds me, I've been to enough places to know that I should have kept a better eye on my drink. I made mistakes too, because I didn't let anyone know where I was going. I told Marshall that I might use the restroom, but if I didn't say that much, he might not have found me, and he may not have saved me either. If anything, you should be thanking him, not yelling at him when he did nothing wrong. You're being protective, but in this time and place, it's not the way you should be acting. You should be appreciative. I am. I still don't want you around him, Fiona. Ellen, stop. That's not your decision, Mom. I'm 19 years old. I'm not a child. You can say all you want that you don't want me to hang around Marshall. But that doesn't mean that I would ever listen to you. He's my best friend and my boyfriend who I chose to date or be who I choose to date or be friends with is not your decision. As long as you live in my house, then I'll move, the blonde said firmly, watching as her parents' eyes widened. Fiona, don't say that, her father said softly, while her mother stared in shock. No, all my life I wanted a family. I wanted parents and people who would claim me as theirs. Marshall and the boys in the band are part of my family. They claimed me first. Sure, legally you two and Finn and Jake and Lady and the girls are my only family, but you don't have to be blood to be family. These guys are like Fiona paused, looking around at all the guys in the room. They had all shown up and stayed just for her. No, they are my brothers, just like Finn and Jake. And Marshall's my other half. I love him. Hearing this had the boys in the band grinning. You can't make me choose who is or is not allowed to be in my family because that decision is mine, and you can't separate me from them like how they can't separate me from you two. Okay. One second. Okay. Okay. Fine. In a sense, you are right, but I worry about you, Fiona, Ellen said, bringing her hand to her daughter's face, worry etched on her features. I know, but that could have happened to me anywhere, Mom. It could have happened to any person there, and it could have been so much worse. It really could have. Fee, do you even remember what happened? Marshall asked, sitting in the chair by her bed. Ash, Moko, and FP were standing beside him. I remember bits and pieces. I remember going to the bathroom, then it's blank, then that guy touching me, whispering my ear in the hallway, she said softly, looking disgusted. That's the last thing I remember. After she finished speaking, a new voice entered the room. That's quite impressive how much you remember, considering the high levels of GHB we found in your system. You're very lucky that you were brought here soon enough to avoid any serious side effects. Fiona looked around. Marshall, the band, and her parents seemed to recognize the man. Who are you? Ah, my apologies. My name is Dr. Prince, and I am the leading physician on your case, he said, flipping through the clipboard. You were brought here earlier this evening, around 11:30 or so. The young man here gave us your symptoms, and the officers gave us the drug confiscated from the man who assaulted you, along with his assumptions of what it was. We ran some tests and found no trace of alcohol in your system, but did find evidence of the drug GHB. There was no evidence of sexual assault, though there was some bruising on your back and arms, and cuts on your wrists from the ties used to bind you. You're quite lucky you hadn't been drinking. Both alcohol and GHB are depressants, and with the amount we found in your system, any more of a depressant could have had potentially fatal consequences, especially since he'd already overdosed you. You've woken up several times since you've been here, each time in a delirious state. So we've decided to keep you until tomorrow morning for further observation, and after that you'll be discharged. Hearing that, Fiona nodded. Thank you. Fiona's parents had stayed another few hours, but they eventually had to leave. Her mother had work early the next morning, and the girls needed desperately to be put in bed. Jackie especially. Charlie was asleep in the car seat. After giving her parents a kiss goodbye, Fiona sat back against the pillows inside, Marshall's hands still in hers. We're gonna have to go soon, too, Ash said, moving to where Fiona's parents had been. Yeah, I have work in about an hour or so, Moko said with a sigh. I hate the late night shift. Well, thank you for coming to visit. Visit? We never left. But don't worry about it, girlie. It's nothing. That's what family does, right? FP said with a grin, making Fiona smile. Right. And stop calling me girlie. Sure thing, Fifi. Lob, find Iggy. Girlie works. Knew it would. I'll see y'all later, he said with a wave, walking from the room after ruffling Fiona's hair. Yeah, feel better, Fiona, Moko said, walking after FP. You need a ride, Marsh? Ash asked, heading towards the door. No, I'm gonna stay here. Alright, later, Fio. Guys, wait up! The brunette called, hurrying from the room, as Fiona sighed in amusement, shaking her head as Marshall took her hand once again. So, how are you feeling? He asked softly, adjusting the bed so Fiona could lie back down. Kind of disoriented, definitely jumbled. Shaken and stirred? Most definitely, she said with a small smile. I was really worried about you, Fiona, Marshall said, squeezing her hand as the blonde looked away. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's not your fault. Don't be sorry, he said, reaching over and tilting her face back towards his. Marsh, what happened? Fiona asked suddenly. Huh? The parts I don't remember. What happened? He didn't. I wasn't. Did he? Fiona asked earnestly. She didn't like the fact that she couldn't remember, and the fact that there were large blacked out parts of her memory frightened her. No, no, no. Oh, no, Fiona. He didn't do any more than touch you, I promise. Nothing more than that happened, he said, watching as she sighed, leaning back against the pillows in relief. Oh, thank Glob. Marshall, I know the doctor said what he said, but I wanted to hear from you that I was okay, she said, looking like she was about to cry. So, what did happen? From what I remember, you went to the bathroom. I went to find the guys, and when you weren't back at the bar, I went looking for you at the bathroom. And then? Then I couldn't find you, so I went to have FP help me look. He said you hadn't come back from the restrooms. What did he say to you? You said you remember what that guy said. He said, let's go to my place, and I told him not a chance. I was so tired, and then he told me it wasn't a request. Like it didn't matter what I said because I was leaving with him one way or another. After he said that, it gets fuzzy. Then what happened? FP and I heard you screaming and we found you in the men's room. We ripped the stall door from its hinges to get to you. Blob, Fiona, you had me scared to death. Then the guy ran from the stall and FP hunted him down and beat the hell out of him. The band brought him back and then I beat the hell out of him. The only thing that stopped me from killing him was you. FP was with you and you came running from the stall. I saw you almost fall, so I dropped him and caught you. You held me so tightly, the blonde said, vaguely recalling how her body was flush against his arm keeping her firmly in place. I wasn't letting you go. Glove, Fiona, you had me totally freaked, especially when you passed out again. Just after that, the paramedics arrived and brought you here. Thank you. For what? Marshall was genuinely curious. What in the world could she be thanking him for? For always helping me out, for always saving me, for always finding me when I need you. You're like my guardian angel, Marsh. Do you forget that I'm also a bad influence? I'm hot-headed, and I'm like totally evil to other people when it comes to you? Hearing this, Fiona smiled. Fine then, you're my demonic guardian angel, but you being a bad influence makes it fun, and your hot-headedness is only when somebody messes with me, like FP does, and you being totally evil is a total exaggeration, but I wouldn't have you any other way, because the way you are and the person you are is the Marshall I fell in love with. I wouldn't change you for all the fame, money, or spaghetti in the world. Hearing this, Marshall smiled. You're a true romantic, Fiona. Spaghetti, really? It is awesome. Enough said. Well, I wouldn't change you for anything if it meant you'd be any different, he said with a yawn. Marsh, have you gotten any sleep at all? Nah, I don't need much sleep. Besides, I wanted to be sure you were gonna be okay. Well, I'm gonna be fine. Why don't you get some rest? I'm good, Fee. Don't worry about it. You get some rest. You look exhausted. Marshall watched as she scooted over in the bed. Sleep with me. No, Fee, that's your bed. I'll sleep better with you with me, Fiona said with a determined face. Seeing this, Marshall sighed and walked over to the other side of the bed. Fine, I'll sleep on this side so I don't get strangled by your IV, okay? Immediately, the blonde scooted over, making room for him, and when Marshall climbed on the bed, she snuggled close as his arm wrapped around her, holding her tightly against him. In moments, the blonde had fallen asleep, her head nestled under his chin, but Marshall lay awake for a bit longer, feeling the warmth radiating from her, and listened to her soft, serene breathing as she lay next to him. Realization suddenly struck him hard, and Marshall held onto the blonde tightly. He could have lost her. She could have been hurt, or worse. She almost was. Fiona turned in her sleep, nuzzling closer to Marshall. Glob, Fiona, don't you ever scare me like that again, he said softly, rolling on his side and wrapping his other arm around the blonde and kissing her forehead and then ever so gently her lips. Please, I could never bear to lose you, he said softly, burying his face in her hair. Closing his eyes, he let sleep carry him away as he held his love in his arms. Oh, wow, that was a really intense. That was like really, oh my god. It took me almost an hour to read that chapter because, like the guy said, it's like two chapters in one. There were italicized parts from the perspective of that creepy guy, and then there were non-italicized parts that were from the perspective of like the regular perspective of the book. I mean, it's not there's no like first person perspective or anything. It just is what it is anyway. But it was like two chapters put together, so I guess technically it is like chapter 55 and 56. But wait, chapter 56 and 57. Whatever. I'm calling it all one chapter. It's all written as one chapter, so I'm gonna keep it there. And I'm gonna read some more chapters and I will be right back. But I'm gonna end this video here and I will put two chapters in the next book, although technically this was two chapters. But in the next video I'm gonna put two chapters. So the next chapter is probably going to be uploaded either later today or tomorrow. I'm trying to upload these over the next few weeks, over the next few days, I mean. So I'm gonna hopefully put up the next video, I mean, which is gonna have two chapters in it. So I'm gonna be bringing you guys the next chapters either probably hopefully later today, like whenever I upload this. Hopefully it's gonna go up same day. I will try to do that. Otherwise, it'll be up tomorrow. I love each and every one of you guys. Please don't forget to always be yourself. Be good to yourself and to others. I love each and every one of you guys. I already said that. You are valid, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.